How are you feeling today?
I am doing pretty good. I've been going kind of hard in the paint, so my voice is gone. But it's been good times.
What's a day look like for Dr. Karen Stewart?
So it depends on the day. So I have some administrative duties, and then I also have some clinical duties. So on any given day, I'm doing one of those two or both. Usually, you're always doing one. So on my clinical days, I start seeing patients at 8:30 and finish at 5:30, and have a break in between. And yeah, so it's just sort of back to back. And on my administrative days, as I'm doing meetings, really trying to organize treatment and care for the people in Georgia.
Okay. How close do you live to work? Are you a city girl?
Now I live in Mableton, so I live, um, just in Mableton. So I don't often go into the office. I'm usually more remote. So I wake up and I'm at the office, which is nice, especially for me because I'm not a morning person. I'm more of a, night owl than a morning lark. So it's nice to be able to work remotely. That's been a real joy. That one positive thing that came from the pandemic.
Got it. So you split time from home to office in what are you about 60/40? What are we saying? 50/50?
No, more like 80/20, 80 at home and 20 going into the office, either for meetings or to see patients. Usually, if I'm seeing patients, like I have to usurp somebody else's office space. So it really makes it easier when I'm seeing patients remotely. But, because of certain things like, prescribing controlled substances, et cetera, you do have to see people face to face periodically.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Well, I'm gonna introduce you in a moment. We're 1 minute in, so I don't want to rush it. It takes people sometimes a little bit to recognize something is happening. So I'll talk a little bit about why I wanted to have this conversation for anybody that taps in. I saw you do a short piece on one of the local news stations, and I was like, oh, Spelman's sister. She's talking about a topic that is kind of near and dear to my heart, and I just immediately went to message you and was like, hey, I want to explore that a little bit more. It was a short clip, and I thought there was a lot that could be explored, especially for our community.
Mhm.
And obviously, over the years, we're class of something something, and
The
we've seen
1900s.
we've seen we've seen a few things, and we've had some friends that have had challenges, and we've had some loss, we've had some suicides. I mean, there's just been things that happen as you traverse life. And
Mhm.
what I wanted, and what I'm always thinking about is when it comes to black men specifically, what can our communities do? Because I really do believe in the idea that community health as an idea, we used to live in, before nuclear families, we used to live in our communities. And,
Mhm.
if you had an issue, you'd walk down the street and talk to grandma, or you talk
Mhm.
to uncle, whoever. And now we're so spread out that I sometimes believe that the only time we're willing to create or tap into community is when we go to a facility or we schedule an appointment with someone and we show up
Mhm.
there. And but I do believe there is a component to health and wellness that is also just about understanding the resources right at your disposal, at your fingertips, or maybe trying to create those for yourself. And I think sometimes this particular conversation for me, or these types of conversations, also about me trying to understand what do I have access to, what
Mhm.
what relationships do I have where people that I know can help me, unpack some things or figure something out or help my children or help my family. So that's the reason for me to do this. And I have had some, challenges with a few friends that, things didn't pan out as I would have liked, maybe career wise or this or that. And you
Mhm.
start to stress and you look at your children and they depend on you. Look at your wife, you look at this. And I say that, man, we have to figure out how to support each other as, on a continuum, not just when things are in these dire straits. So that's why I like these conversations because I believe that there's an element of, oh, I could just talk to a close friend of mine who does this, or I could be vulnerable and share this with a friend of a friend, and maybe someone will engage with me on it. So that's for me. And we're at 6:34, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce you, Dr.
Okay.
Karen Stewart. So I'm Willis Walker, and I went to Morehouse College some years ago and met freshman year Dr. Karen Stewart. She wasn't a doctor then. She was getting ready to be, or she was prepping to be. Dr. Stewart is a board certified adult and adolescent psychiatrist. She's a proud Spelman College alumna and a graduate of Morehouse School of Medicine. Dr. Karen has dedicated her career to helping people access culturally responsive mental health care and breaking down the stigma that keeps too many of us from seeking support. And I think that last little piece is kind of what I want to touch on tonight. What are the stigmas that keep us from seeking support and why? You know, why?
Yeah,
So,
so
hello, good evening.
good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. This is certainly my life's work, and one of the things that's really important to me is decreasing health disparities in the mental health field. And there are many different reasons why it is difficult for Black people and Black men in particular to seek care. The one of the first things is that there's a healthy mistrust of the medical community, right? Black people have that, and it's real, and it makes sense because of the things that have happened in the past. I mean, you have got example of the medical community just sort of doing the wrong thing when it comes to Black people, and Black men in particular. So that's one of the things that keeps Black men from engaging in care and in treatment. And I think another part of it is that there's sort of this thought that if you engage in treatment, then that's some kind of character flaw or some kind of character issue that you have because you may be feeling depressed or anxious or be dealing with trauma in a way that feels like it's not in the box that we consider manly or manhood or characteristics of what we want Black men to be, or we say we want Black men to be. That's another big part of why Black men don't seek care. So those things in general are two of the reasons. And I think the third reason is that there aren't a lot of clinicians that look like Black men. When we're looking at psychiatrists, about 2% of psychiatrists are
Wow.
Black men in general. So,
Wow.
it's much easier to go into a situation where you are going to walk in and you feel like somebody's going to be familiar with you, what you're managing, what you're going through, what kind of cultural things go along with how you are doing and what you're doing and what you're managing. And when you don't necessarily feel like you're going to see that when you walk into the building or go on to your virtual visit, then it can be daunting to say, oh, is this person who doesn't look like me going to really understand what I'm going through and be able to provide me with what I need to get better? And that makes a lot of sense. So I think that's one of a few of the reasons why it's difficult for Black men to engage in treatment.
So, so let me ask a couple of questions. One, as as a psychiatrist, what do you and maybe just the top 1 to 3 things that you see that are just common mental health challenges facing Black men today? Things you repeatedly see day after day in your practice.
Anxiety is top. Anxiety for sure. Depression.
Related to,
So it's interesting that you asked that. Anxiety is really your body's response, physiological response to some kind of stressor. And that stressor could be anything. It could be job related, it could be family related. Oftentimes, when I see Black men, there's usually some kind of crisis that has happened, and they're just like, you know what, I can't manage this. Or sometimes there's a legal issue or reason that they're seeking treatment. So those are usually the two things that bring people into treatment. So anxiety, depression,
anxiety, depression,
and PTSD. So trauma.
some form of trauma. Okay.
Hmm.
I'm gonna take a quick note on that because I want to come back to that.
And let me say, like trauma is It can be in the sense of having that life-threatening trauma where you feel like you're in danger or somebody that's around you is in danger, or you viewed something traumatic in your life. But it can also be like, just a trauma of living in a country that doesn't really care about you the way that the country should care about you, and oftentimes is making things more difficult for you in general. So that builds up over time, and it can really start to take a toll. So there are many different ways to look at trauma. For Black men in particular, sort of this repeated cycle of having Black men who are seeing themselves on television being murdered by police, or hearing about different murders in different places and how in your communities even, and seeing that on repeat in a cycle, even if it hasn't
Yeah.
happened to you, it can
I had to
make you
stop.
feel that way.
I had to stop.
Mm,
There are periods where I've literally seen stories start and I just shut it
mm,
down. Um, because I started to feel the tension and the impact in a way that was, I felt alarming. I felt like, man,
mhm,
these are continued, impacts that you replay in your mind, and once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. So I have intentionally shut down Instagram stories that start, or if it
mhm,
starts, it's so clickbaity, and it's so necessary to know about because that is also traumatic, is trying to run from it and trying
mhm,
to um, ignore it or close your eyes or look away. Like there's pain from that because now you feel as though you're ignoring someone else's hardship and loss, and you should, give it the full respect. But then you have to, I believe, protect your own mental well-being. I don't know what the mix is, but I am certain that two things can be very true at the same time. Those stories are
mhm.
important, and I can't digest it all the time. I just can't.
You absolutely cannot. And what you're doing is really responsible. Like, I often advise people with so much news coming at us every day in so many different ways. I say pick one or two top people or organizations that you respect and you think that they actually provide good news. And I say pick that and focus on that. And, limit your engagement with that as well, to a couple of articles a day and not so much always going through and watching those videos on repeat. I also advise people to say, you know what, instead of listening to the news or watching the news, sometimes reading it can be better, because it can be less trauma provoking if you're reading it without the images. So I think that that's really helpful for people. And you do need to cut it off. Like there are times when you need to be informed, but you don't need to know every minute detail of what's happening. And if you find that you're re-traumatizing yourself over and over again and it's beginning to make you feel anxious or depressed, then you know that it's definitely time to say, I need to take a step back.
Uh, okay. I want
So
to
you're
come
doing
back
the
to
right
that though.
thing. You're
I
doing the
want to
right thing,
come.
absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been trying to do in the mornings, and I don't want to talk about it too long, but I decided that in the morning I would take just a little time, even before coffee, to just, I'm into yoga, so I'm going to point out the fact that that's the way I try to guard myself against starting my day with so
Mhm,
much incoming. Is I'll take 10 minutes, I'll sit down, I'll just do some stretches, I'll start my coffee, but I'll just enjoy the smell and look out the
mhm,
window and just try to slow things down. And what
mhm,
I've started to notice is the longer I do that, then it turns into 11 practice, 11 moves, then 12 moves. I'm starting
mhm,
to learn to push out getting information incoming that can feel anxious or tense. I'm pushing that out now longer than 10 minutes. Now, an
mhm,
hour out, I have yet to turn on anything that would inform me of some chaos. I'm just, maybe checking some email or starting with some small work projects. And then maybe 10 or 11 o'clock, I might tune in for a little bit to find out what's going on in the world.
mhm,
Um, those things feel helpful. They feel calming. I do wonder though at how sustainable it is to try to keep that up while so many things are going on in the world. But I
mhm.
want to ask you a few more questions. so that this is not about me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean,
um,
but you're doing some really good things. I mean, what you're describing is mindfulness, and mindfulness is a great tool to manage anxiety. So, and I think it's good that other people know that you're doing that. Setting the tone for your day is important, and how you end your day is important because that's going to affect your sleep, your rest, your rejuvenation. So those things are very important. And for me, I usually start my day with gratitude. Listing three things that I'm grateful for, and then at the end of the day, listening three things that happened that day that I'm grateful for. And it just changes the tone of how I wake up and how I go to sleep.
have you always done that, or is that some new practice that you've added? And if it's new, what prompted it?
So I have not always done that. I started to do that, as a psychiatrist, I'm in therapy. I have no qualms about saying that I'm in therapy. It's one of the most essential things that I do. And when you're training, you also have to do what we call supervision, which is really, you trying to make sure that your stuff doesn't bleed into whatever you're doing with other people. So I had not done that, but I had several losses in my life, and my mom, my brother are really good two really good friends in a very short period of time. And when that happens, you can really get into this sort of thought of, do I have a cloud over my head? What is happening? What is going on? And it can make it very difficult for you to see all of the positive things around you. So it was actually a suggestion from my therapist to start the day with gratitude and end the day with gratitude. And it's one of the best tips that I've gotten that I think is really doable for people. And it can be small stuff. Like sometimes I think, I'm grateful for the bed that I'm sleeping in. It's, nice and soft and comfortable. So it doesn't have to be anything that's really outrageous. It just needs to be something you're thankful for.
Just a reminder.
Mhm.
Let me ask you another question. You mentioned anxiety, PTSD, and trauma. I believe those were the three. And and depression. Depression was one.
Mhm. Mhm.
What are some sneaky ones that you could think of that people kind of overlook?
So I don't know if the diagnoses are necessarily sneaky, but I think in how they present can be very sneaky, right? One
Okay.
of the things that is insidious is you have these people who are extremely high functioning. They're going to their job, they're performing, they're providing, they're participating in their community. They're doing all the things that a good Black man should do based on everybody's definition of a good Black man. But in reality, they are really struggling, and that can look many different ways. It can look like isolation at certain periods. It can look like some physical manifestations, headaches, stomach aches, medical problems, high blood pressure, those things. It can manifest in that way. It can manifest in you just not being able to sleep well at night. It can manifest in your appetite changes. I mean, there are many different ways that it can sort of
Mm,
sneak up on you insidiously. And another thing that I can often see is you're doing, you're using maladaptive coping skills to deal with things like drinking or smoking weed or, sexual promiscuity or any of those things that can ultimately lead to some kind of harm, bodily harm, if you do them in ways that are not responsible.
gotcha. Okay. I find myself when I'm dealing with a lot of stress, I find myself doing two things that I don't always like. One is constantly looking for some distraction of some sort, whether it's, just to go out and go listen to some music, which is pleasant. But if you take it to the extreme where, you have other things to do, but you keep looking for some sort of distraction, it can really slow you down. It can kind of ruin your planning for, the work functions, things of that nature, where you just feel like you can't get enough relaxation. And
Mhm.
sometimes I believe those may be indicators that you're stress overload. You're just stress overloaded, and you can't get enough sleep, or
Mhm.
you need more. Your vacation ends after a week, and you feel like you didn't even take a vacation. It's because the whole time you've been thinking
Mhm.
about your situation.
Yeah, you're really dealing with mental exhaustion, and you can't get enough sleep to manage mental exhaustion. You really have to start to unburden yourself of whatever it might be that's making things difficult for you. And that can come in many
Hold on
different
a second. Go
ways.
back. Go back. I
Mhm.
don't think I've ever heard that. You can't get enough sleep to manage mental exhaustion. Okay.
You cannot get enough sleep. You're not going to wake up rested if you have very heavy mental burdens that you're carrying. Even at night, subconsciously, we're dreaming about these things that are really bothering us, and you just you can't get an escape. And a lot of times, people talk about using coping skills to manage, um, you know, anxiety, depression, etc., stress, but the best way to manage stress is to remove stress in any situation that you can, where it's actually possible to remove stress, which is
I've
that's very
never heard
difficult.
that before.
Yeah.
But it makes so much sense when you're under a lot of duress. You wake up with it on your mind. You go to bed with it on your mind. You
Hmm.
cannot escape it. Well,
Hmm.
so what do you? Okay, so you got to find a way to get rid of it.
Hmm.
Um, you can't
Yeah.
outsleep it. You can't outdrink it.
Yes.
You can't outsex it.
Can't outsmoke it. You cannot do any
Uh,
of those things. So, I think one of the big things that I think is really relevant for Black men in particular is making sure you're not managing things that don't really belong to you, right? That you're not really taking things and carrying things that don't belong to you. And, that is the antithesis of how we often move in the Black community in general, where we're taking on things, piling on things that other people need us to do, but they may not be in the wheelhouse of what you need for yourself. And you've got to really sort of take stock of what those things are and to manage those things. If you're thinking about it in like work terms, you have your priorities, your top three priorities. And then you're like, okay, well, what fits into these top three priorities and what can I set aside? Because if you take on so much, you're just not going to be able to manage that burden mentally, and then that can turn into physical issues. So that's the best way to relieve stress is to, you know, put something elsewhere whenever you can, if you can. I know that's tough, but it's important to think
no,
about.
but it's something. Yeah, I think thinking about it and trying to come up with a plan for what happens because I've been in situations where, you like try to sleep, try to get a massage, try to relax, whatever. But sometimes these things are so big that you can't escape them. You
Hmm.
can't stop the mind from moving long enough to feel relaxed for a second.
Hmm.
Um, given the real, so then I'll ask you this: what are some of the most successful ways that you've seen people in that situation you're talking about, where
Hmm.
you can't outsleep it, you
Hmm.
can't outdrink it, you can't outsmoke it, you can't outsex it? What are some of the most successful ways you've seen people, I would say, decouple from some of these burdensome
Hmm.
things that are just wiping them out?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is, what does your community look like? Who are those people that you can call on to help you to manage things when you need them? What do you do with that community? Are you able to ask for help within your community? Small community of people you trust. That is really important, right? If you're thinking about, oh, shoot, I need to, take my boys to go get X, Y, and Z, and I also need to be at job at the same time. Like, do you have people that you can call who can help you with those things that you trust? And if you don't, what are you doing to lean in and trying to build that community? It's really interesting. I heard Trevor Noah say something once. He's like, all the things that as we become more successful, if you will, the things that we used to rely on community for, we're now farming out, like
Hmm.
taking care of kids, taking care of grandparents, cleaning the house, those kind of
I
things
believe that.
are being farmed out as the more successful we become and the more, disposable income we may have. We're farming those things out. And what happens with that is you lose community. And community is really your backbone all the way across. And I know like you have a really good community of Black men that you can rely on. We talked about that a little bit
Fortunate,
earlier.
very fortunate.
Yeah, and when you have that, you don't feel like you have to do everything because it's impossible to do everything. And I think that that's really important is how do you build your community? And if you have the community, how do you use that community? Because you can have plenty of community and never, reach out to them or never ask for help or, never let them know what's going on and that you're having trouble. So, it's really important to have that community and to use it.
Yeah, we have a mutual friend that I just got off the phone with before I talked to you that gave me a story about reaching out to a colleague, asking a few questions
Mhm.
about how they are navigating this new world with the changing of AI in their workplace and
Mhm.
sort of the shifting of priorities around focusing on the people who kind of at the top of the organization and finding ways to manage some of these other items. Um, the response they got from the person they were talking to before that person even entered the conversation about what they called about was,
Mhm.
I really appreciate the fact that you had the courage to take care of yourself and have this conversation.
Mhm.
The way this person received it was like, well, hey, I didn't call for that, but then they realized, oh,
I
I
needed
kind of
that.
I kind of needed that,
Yeah.
and so the
Mhm.
guy was like, it's awesome that you are taking care of yourself by engaging with people and not trying to
Mhm.
figure this all out by yourself. And I think that's the biggest challenge sometimes is feeling like I got to figure this stuff out. I mean, how
Mhm.
many times do you say to yourself, even in a day, I got to figure this out. I got to figure this out.
Mhm.
When maybe just raising your hand and saying, "Hey, I don't know what I'm talking about here. Can you tell me what's been done in the past? What have you
Mhm.
done?" Um, but
Mhm.
but anyway,
You
so I'd
know
love
that.
for you to speak to that idea of like, how do you reframe asking for help so that it looks like strength? How do you do it?
Well, I think you have to reframe how you picture or how you see vulnerability, right? Vulnerability isn't one of those masculine traits that we typically think of. It's the exact opposite. You're supposed to stuff everything down. And so you have to have a different relationship with vulnerability in order to be able to have those conversations. And oftentimes that means that you have to get in touch with how you actually feel. Like, oftentimes you're spending so much time managing things, doing things, you don't really have an opportunity to think about how you feel and what's going on about with any particular situation. So it may start with self, right? Let me stop after the end of my day. Let me write some things out or type some things out or voice record some things about what happened and how I felt about it. Not just what happened, but what happened and how I felt about it, so that you can start really naming some of the emotions that you're having. It's not something that men are commonly doing. Black men aren't commonly able to have those conversations. I've talked to Black men who say they just don't feel comfortable having those conversations with their wife, their girlfriend, their friends. Probably the place where people feel most comfortable with vulnerability is usually in more spiritual places or religious places, where they can sort of talk about what's happening and how they feel about it. But, really beginning to start to have those conversations with yourself can be a way to prepare for vulnerability with other people. And as a friend, like if somebody comes to you, right, and they're vulnerable, the way you react is going to be so important with whether or not they do it again, right? If somebody comes to you and says, hey, Willis, I'm really struggling with X, Y, and Z, and you like, man, just man up. You need to just man up and take care of it. They're not going to come back to you again because you did not offer anything that was helpful. And, it starts to feel like a flaw if you're talking about those things and people are then like, just deal with it. So the way you
I'll
all
tell you,
receive each other is important.
the number of times I've probably even said that to my own boys, it's like, man, you just got to man up. You got to get this
Mhm.
done, or just figure, you got to figure it out, or you just got to get through it. I think one of the things we say a lot is you just got to get through it,
Mhm.
whatever that means.
Mhm.
So since you're talking about it, because that was further down in my list
Mhm.
of questions, is when you see someone or you feel like you're worried a friend is struggling, like what are some of the first signs that a close friend should notice? What do you see in your that we often a layman might miss?
I think the biggest thing is behavior change. right? And your friends and family are going to notice it. They just may not say anything about it, right?
Okay.
Behavior changes can be huge. It can be, um, we go out, man, and you usually come with us, and you're not coming anymore. Is everything okay? What's going on? Or it can be, hey, man, we usually, you when we go out, you usually don't drink this much, and I'm seeing that you're drinking more and more every day, and I'm coming from you from a place of care. I just want to know, are you? What's happening? What's happening that's making you need to self medicate more? So behavior changes can be key to things and how people manage things. On the more serious end of the spectrum, if people are giving away things or giving their
Say
version of
more.
goodbye.
Say more. Giving away things.
Yeah, so one of the things that you can look at for people who might be considering suicide is, are they giving away valuable possessions?
Gotcha.
Things that they held near and dear at any point. And there was an experience that, I had personally, that I found out about later, is that one of my friends, he gave away his cats. And had I known that he gave away those cats, to me, that is a telltale sign that,
That would have been the
you are,
trigger.
yeah, that's something that's really serious. So are you saying goodbyes in your own special way? Are you giving things to people that, you want them to hold on to because they would be reminded of you when they have it? If you see those kind of things, it's important to speak on it. And if you come from a place of love and caring, it's really hard to get it wrong if you come from a place of love and caring. If you come from a place of judgment, then, that's definitely going to turn people off. But if you come from a place and say, yeah, man, like, I'm scared for you, right? I'm concerned about you. I'm scared for you because of X, Y, and Z, and name the behavior. That's the best way to start having
Okay.
a conversation. And after you name the behavior, maybe that person's not ready to have a conversation about it, but you've got to leave the door open and say, if you're not ready right now, just know I'm going to be checking on you. And when you are ready, I'm happy to listen. Or if you need other help, I'm happy to let you know. I'm happy to see what I can do to get you some of the help that you need. That's so important and can be so helpful.
If they're insisting though that everything is fine, what do you do?
Truth tell, like, if you're saying everything is fine, but you're drinking more, you're not showing up for your responsibilities, you keep flaking out on us, I've seen lately that you've been looking at buying a gun. All of those kind of things. Like, if you start to name those things with people and say, yeah, you may tell me you're okay, but your behavior is saying otherwise. So you have to truth tell. And then you
Truth
also
tell.
have to know that there's only so much you can do, right?
Okay.
You aren't going to be able to fix all things. But if you can intervene early enough, like when you start to first see those behavior changes, you have a better chance of really helping that person to get some help, or sort of manage some of the feelings that they're having.
Okay. I'm looking at a question just sent to me. Again, guys don't want to be seen asking questions of a therapist on Instagram. So I asked all my guys, come jump on with me. They're like, yeah, I don't know. But I just got a
Hmm.
text. I got a text. Many people struggle with the idea of taking medication for mental
Hmm.
health.
Hmm.
I've struggled with that. I've seen family members struggle with it.
Hmm.
How can someone tell when anxiety or depression has reached a point where medication should be a part of the treatment plan?
That is an excellent question. I always think about it in terms of level of functioning. Like, if you are at the point where you are not able to function and perform things the way that you typically do, you can't get out of bed in the morning, you're not showering every day, you are avoiding responsibilities that you typically will jump up to, you're not going out and doing the things that you really enjoy. I think that's the time to really have an evaluation, to talk about therapy and or medication. And when I'm thinking about treatment for depression, anxiety, trauma, whatever it may be, I really think about it in sort of three different modalities. I think about, lifestyle changes, I think
Okay.
about therapy, and then I think about medication. And you can mix and match any of those. So if you're concerned, maybe you don't start with medicine, but if you see a good therapist, and they're like, they're you're in treatment and things aren't improving, they'll recommend that you go have a conversation about medication. You can always go if you have a primary care physician. Black men, please, y'all, get a primary care physician, go check in, please, please, please do that. I feel like mental health and physical health are so important. And if you ignore either one or both, then you're
Oh yeah.
definitely not going to be able to manage things. So, but there are many different avenues of ways you can get help, by reaching out.
It's funny. You talk about the primary care physician. I just had to fight to get one for a family member because they're just
Mhm.
terrified of doctors.
Mhm.
It's always been that way. But we tend to go to the doctor when we have an acute problem, very
Mhm.
specific problem, not
Mhm.
and then the next time we see someone different, the next time we see someone different, and
Mhm.
we're afraid to let anyone kind of track us historically. I don't know. I find it fascinating that you wouldn't want a doctor. I even want my doctor to age with me because I want to wake up one day and we're having the same problems, and I'm just going to assume that you're going to have some good ideas because you do this for a living. And
Mhm.
when I'm 60, I want my doctor to be about 65. That's what I want. I want them to be about 5 years ahead of me.
So they can help and talk about some of the things that have been going
Yeah,
on.
tell
Yeah,
me
I
what's
mean,
going
like,
on.
that's important to mostly have somebody that you trust is going to see you as a
Yes,
person. And sometimes that takes a little bit of shopping around. And, in our country, I got to be real, it's not easy to manage this. The access to healthcare isn't what it should be. And it's even more daunting for Black people and for Black men who, again, are concerned about how is this going to affect my lifestyle, right? How is it going? Could this potentially affect how people look at me? Could
I think
this
that's a huge
potentially,
thing.
yeah, could this potentially, prevent me from doing X, Y, and Z? If they say I need medication, is it going to affect, my appearance? Is it going to affect my libido?
Right.
Is it going to affect all of these things? So, there are many different things that Black men are considering when they come into the office to talk to me, because by the time you're talking to me, you're like, okay, we need some kind of intervention, right?
Yeah.
By the time you're coming to my office. And it's interesting, like, with medication, um, we have that conversation. One way I reframe it is, people are like, oh, I don't want to be dependent on it. I don't want to
Please
become
talk about that. Please,
addicted
please.
to it.
And talk about how likely it is to become addicted to like an SSRI. Why and why
Mhm.
not?
Okay.
And
So,
explain what an SSRI is because I'm
yes.
throwing out terms that,
Yes, absolutely. So an SSRI is a type of medication for typically used for depression and anxiety symptoms. It stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And basically what it does is it helps to replace some of the neurochemicals in your brain responsible for helping you keep a, a steady mood, what I would call a euthymic mood. So not too high, not too low.
what is that word again?
Euthymic mood.
Euthymic mood. Okay.
Not too high, not too low. And so SSRIs are really helpful in treating depression and anxiety, and in some cases, trauma and PTSD as well. We typically use SSRIs for that. So that's, people get concerned about taking medications because they're like, I don't want to become addicted to it.
Now, can I
There's,
stop you for 1 second and
yeah.
ask you to also explain because I've asked about SSRIs because I wanted to understand how they work.
Mhm.
And as I understand it, it helps certain buckets hold on to chemicals that make you feel good a little bit longer. Do you mind sharing a little bit about how that works? Because I think it's helpful for people to sort of understand what these chemicals are doing. They're
Mhm.
not just giving you some feel good like you smoked a joint. There's a real science behind helping you to hold on
Mhm.
to certain chemicals. Go ahead.
Mhm. So, one of the things that helps to maintain mood is you have a few different chemicals that are in your brain that are helping to keep your mood steady. So, things like serotonin, things like norepinephrine, those things are usually in some kind of steady state in your system that helps you to, keep your mood up. So, when you're feeling depressed or you have symptoms of anxiety, like clinical depression or anxiety, not if you're just feeling sad, but if you have clinical depression or anxiety, you're just not making enough of those chemicals typically. So, what you can do is you take the medication to help replace those chemicals in your brain and provide that, the right level so that you can actually continue and have your mood improve. So, that's really what it does. So, it's kind of like you have a bucket of neurochemicals, and depression's poking holes in that bucket, anxiety's poking holes in that bucket, and it's seeping through. And what medication can do is it can help to first of all, keep the bucket intact by plugging up the holes, and then it can help you to fill up the holes that you're experiencing. So that helps with replacing the neurochemicals. When we
Awesome.
think about things like weed or alcohol, those actually they can deplete the those
Serotonin
chemicals in
and
your brain, serotonin, norepinephrine, because it just works in a different reward system in your brain. So they can help deplete those chemicals because when you get high or you drink enough alcohol, those neurochemicals get released at higher levels, and then they get depleted.
oh,
And the
okay,
more they
okay.
get
So you feel
depleted,
great for a minute
you feel
because
good.
they're flooded and then they're just
Yep.
gone. And then it
And I'm not
takes
even
you a
gonna
while to
lie,
build them back up.
you absolutely feel great for a minute. Like, I'm not even going to deny that. But what happens is you start to deplete those chemicals and it's more difficult to replace them. And so you can't ever get back to that line. Of that steady state that you need, that euthymic mood. So, long term use of alcohol or weed or heroin or whatever the drug may be, caffeine, even, sugar, any of those things are not going to help you get to that place where you want to be because your neurochemicals are being depleted.
Okay. All right. Well, now I want to ask you some questions.
Okay.
We got about 15 minutes left or so, and I want to dig into your practice.
Mhm.
Um, what would a typical session one look like with Dr. Karen Stewart?
Okay.
I come into your office, go. I've got issues, Karen. Help me. How
Well,
does it start?
yes. So my first question is usually, how can I help you? Like, why did you come into the office? Because I want to know that. And sometimes that takes a little getting into, right? People don't always immediately start and tell me their whole life story. So it definitely starts with, how can I help you? And that usually starts with some kind of problem that somebody's having. Somebody died, or, I can't function at work, or my wife made me come, like it could be any of those things. And so we start to explore that. And along that way, I get what we call like a history of present illness, which would be what's happening with you, what are your symptoms, how frequent, how severe, and we get that information. And then after that, I'll go into like your medical history, your psychiatric history, your family history. I want to know what other medications you're taking. I want to know what other comorbid diseases you may have, because all of that's going to factor into what we decide to do in terms of treatment. And then ultimately, I think it's really important to have shared decision making when you get to the point where you're talking about treatment. So
Okay.
I talk to people, talk about the symptoms, and then I share the diagnosis with them and say, based on what you said, this is the diagnosis that you have. Is consistent. You meet criteria for X, Y, and Z. And after that, I asked them, I said, does that sound right to you? Right? Because maybe that's just what I'm thinking, right? And I said, does that sound right to you? Because one thing you definitely want to do is you want to be on the same playing field before you start talking about treatment. And so, ask them if that sounds right. If they say that sounds right, I say, here are some different ways that we can manage that issue. And, let's pick and choose what's going to be best for you. Um, you know, there are times when like if I see a patient and I really think that they do need medication to feel better, I will just tell them that. I
Okay.
will say, I don't know that this gets better with just lifestyle changes or just
Okay.
therapy. I think medication could be helpful. Here are the
Would that
options.
be would that be related to, say, when you said you can't outsleep it,
Hmm.
it's just on your mind all the time?
Hmm.
Would that be a space where you say, hey, quite possibly medication would help you regulate a little bit?
Yep.
Now, if that is true,
Hmm.
is there a point where you think you talk them off of the medication, or do they manage an SSRI as, do they manage that forever?
Good question. So typically, my recommendation is that you take medication for 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
Once you get to steady state, you get 6 to 9 months. And then after that, if you're like, I'm feeling great, I think I may be able to come off this medication. I typically slowly increase medication. So when you're coming off, we slowly decrease medication. And during that time period, we're evaluating to see if you are having a return of symptoms, things like that. There are some clues of whether or not somebody might be someone who needs to take medication for, a lifetime. Usually it's if you've had multiple episodes of treatment and you keep relapsing and remitting. That's a sign that you may need to continuously take medication. Or if you have family members who need to continually take medication, that may be an indication. But ultimately, that's part of the shared decision making. If you want to come off of medication and you're in my office, then that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about how to do it safely, so that you feel, so that you can make sure that you're not going to have a return of symptoms and go back to where you were. And I've successfully taken people off of medication for sure. I have, also been unsuccessful in taking people off of medication because they stop the medications and their symptoms come back. But ultimately, for most medications, they're relative, you don't have a lot of side effects with them. So, with some medications. And so people can take them for a lifetime without feeling burdened by them.
Okay.
Um, for Black men in particular, one of the biggest concerns about taking SSRIs is sexual side effects. And I just lay it out from the beginning, right? This is what you can get. Sexual side effects typically come in multiple different forms. One is decreased libido, is something. Second one is usually taking longer to orgasm. And I'm like, in some cases that ain't bad, right? You can keep the party going. But I make
I
sure
can
that they,
speak I can speak to that one.
and
I've
sometimes
had
it
my
is.
own, yes, I've had some challenges. Went through
Mhm,
a tough time when I first found out my parents' health was,
mhm,
struggling. I had a tough job.
mhm,
Um, did some therapy sessions, and just could not get my head right.
mhm,
There were three things impacting me. I was becoming an empty nester. At the same time, I found out the significance of my parents' health. At the same time, I was moving to another city, and at the same time, I started a tough job. And
mhm,
all of that mix, that cocktail was devious. And
mhm,
I went to a therapist. We talked a while. They, much like you said, they made a decision. Hey, let's try, an SSRI, so you can keep some of those happy feelings in your, in your brain a little bit
mhm,
longer. But the downside was, um, taking way too long to orgasm, to the
mhm.
extent that nobody was having any more fun.
Nobody's having
So,
fun anymore.
so, it was like awesome for a minute. And then it's just like, all right, we got to shut this down. We have
Like
to
this
go
ain't
back
working.
to work. We have things to do. Um, so, um, so yeah. So,
So I'm just upfront about that. And what's
but
important
we
to
found a
me,
new medication.
yeah.
It helped. Things went
Mhm.
back to normal. But there was
Mhm.
several months there where I was like, this is not gonna work well.
Yeah, so I tell people, I'm like, first of all, we need to know what your baseline libido is. Like, how are things baseline before you start any medication? And
Hmm.
then if you find out that you're in a place where any of the side effects, sexual side effects are more common the higher the doses of any medication. What's more common is like GI distress, headaches, things like that. And I'm always like, there's no need to suffer in silence, right? If you are having a hard time with any side effects, call your doctor and tell them, hey, it's taking me, 50 minutes to orgasm and my partner ain't having it. So, let me, what can we do? And oftentimes you can switch medications and find something that's more helpful and with fewer side effects and just as actually helpful for the symptoms as well. So I like to be really real with people when they're coming. I'm like, this is what it's going to be, and this is what you need to look out for, and
Yeah.
this is when you need to call me.
Let me ask you, do you think in your practice, I know you don't just see one ethnicity or, one race
Mhm.
group or whatever, but do you think that black men or black boys have emotional needs that are different from other communities that go unmet sometimes when they try to reach out for help?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that keeps them away, right? Is they feel like people aren't going to be paying attention to those things. I feel like cultural humility is so
Mm,
important when you're treating black men, black people in general, but specifically black men. You want to make sure that you're really looking at the challenges that black men have on a day-to-day basis that is going to affect their mental health.
gotcha.
Racism, microaggressions, being at work and code switching, not getting that, promotion because you keep getting overlooked for whomever. Like those are things that are real, right? And then on top of that, for black men in particular, you have all of those things, and then you have this, um, you know, this the sort of idea of masculinity where you are provider, protector, you are like a whole list of things that we wouldn't want one person to do at any time, right? Like there's a whole list of things that it's just impossible to live up to that standard. And so you're also bringing that into your treatment. And you have to pay attention to those things if you want to make sure that you're treating the whole person. And so I think that those are things that black men have a more difficult time with. And in that sort of concern about being vulnerable and what that means as a man and manhood, like that's really important. And I know that I'm speaking to this. I'm certainly not a black man. I know many black men. I love many black men. So
How many?
so
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
so I'm speaking from a place of what I see when people come in for treatment and what it is that I want to make sure that I address, that can make you feel comfortable enough to tell me things that you aren't telling aren't telling other people. Like I've had so many people disclose things to me and say, I have not ever told another living soul that in my life. And just what the unburdening of that is like for them. And, from my perspective, if you do that for the first time after you've been carrying things for so long and not trusting, and the person on the other end of that information doesn't react in the way that you need them to in that moment, if they're not supportive, if they're not helpful, if they're not encouraging, if they're not validating, then that might be your last time, seeking out treatment. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And one of the things that I think is really important is like, can we get more, black men, black women in these roles as therapists, as, psychiatrists, as primary care physicians, like any of those things? Because when you walk into an office, I walked into an office and been like, oh yeah, black woman, phew. And there's just sort of this
Oh, no
burden that
doubt.
gets dropped, right? So
Yeah.
black men are doing that as well, and I think it's important for people to know.
I think a lot of that also just simply has to do with that you won't have to explain certain things
Hmm.
multiple ways for it to land.
Hmm.
It's just you feel freer. I associate it with the same feeling I have when I travel abroad and I don't speak a language, and you
Hmm.
have to work so much harder to
Hmm.
communicate an idea and how that
Hmm.
fatigue sets in by the end of the day. And you just,
Hmm.
at the end of every day, if you're in a country where you don't speak the language, you're just tired, and you don't even
Yeah.
know why. You're just tired,
Hmm.
And I feel like that's the same thing when it comes to healthcare or mental health care. I've talked to several therapists. Some of the easiest conversations were black men, um, often black women, or someone with brown skin from another country that also
Hmm.
understands how it
Hmm.
feels to be in brown skin in the U.S. Having said that,
Hmm.
I had a white female lesbian therapist one time that I
Yeah.
fell in love with,
Yeah.
and I
Is.
think she had a perspective of being a Midwestern uh,
Hmm.
uh, uh, woman trying to, live live in a community with people who didn't, embrace her and her wife. And I think there was
Mm,
an understanding of
mm,
how it feels to feel othered that sort of was
yep.
easy for us to connect. But
And it's
but I,
not to say
go
that,
ahead.
white men or women can't develop the cultural humility that's
Oh
necessary
no,
to treat.
of course they
But,
can.
in terms of, to be real, when you're a black person and like you said, you don't have to do that translation or
Yeah.
that explanation. It's just going to put you in a different place in terms of being able to come out and be vulnerable.
No doubt. And we all have white friends that really understand because they spend enough time in
Mm,
the community that you don't have to do extra work.
mm,
It's
mm.
just it's just rare. It's not as frequent as I believe many of us would like. Um, do you mind sharing before we start to wrap up? Do you mind sharing one story that might illuminate what's possible when
Mhm.
someone reaches out for help? Do you have, without sharing names or divulging
Yeah.
details?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, so I think of this one gentleman in particular, black man. We had a virtual visit. He came in and he was actually on leave of absence from work because he could not, perform his work duties because of depression and anxiety. He had issues at home. He was in the midst of a divorce, but still living with his partner, and they were raising a child together. He was very concerned about, you know, not being able to be there for his child, like really concerned about that. And he's
yeah,
like,
it sounds hard.
what does co-parenting look like, if we move out of this house together? So that was a big piece of it. And, he was really having a hard time with depression and anxiety, severe symptoms. Like I said, when you're at the point where you're not working, things like that, it can be a huge issue. So we had a conversation. Again, I think of treatment in three different modalities. I think about lifestyle changes, I think about therapy, and then I think about medication management. And, for him, ultimately, he's like, yes, I would like to try some medication. And so we talked about the options and landed on Lexapro. Generic name for that is escitalopram, for treatment for him. I always start low and increase slowly. One of the big things about SSRIs is that they don't work quickly, right? So, people get discouraged sometimes. So I
Hmm.
make sure that I let people know, in order to really feel the maximum effects, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks because brain chemistry is complicated and your brain will do things to, change things up a bit if they see that you're taking an SSRI. So, we talked about that and just sort of a trajectory and expectations. We reviewed all the side effects. And he started on Lexapro, and we eventually got him up to 10 milligrams, and it was tremendously helpful. And we talked about his goals too. I was like, if you feel better, what does that look like? Like if you feel better, what does that look like? And for
Okay.
him, he wanted to leave his job and he wanted to start something up on his own. And that's what, having the energy to be able to do that is what success looked like for him.
Having energy.
And yep, and so he ended up doing that, and no longer has Kaiser Insurance. So, oops, I said my name on place. No longer has the insurance, and so
I'll delete it. Don't worry.
yeah, um, doesn't have the insurance anymore that, so he can see me. But other than that, he would still be coming to see me intermittently. So, it was really helpful. And, I've got, for every one story, I have another story that didn't work out so well, but what I'm going to do every time is I'm going to try because I just want people. I know I've seen it work too many times for me not to tell people that you can feel better than you can feel right now. You can have a more fulfilling life. You can, be happier. You can spend more times with friends and family. You can be productive in the way that you want to be productive. But, you got to treat that depression or anxiety or substance use disorder or PTSD or bipolar disorder or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
If you treat that, you can have a better life. And for me, that's at the root of it. Like, what is your goal? What are we working towards?
I mean, I can tell you that when I had a lot of concerns around taking medication or an
Mm-hmm.
SSRI because I needed to understand what I had to do a lot of research to get comfortable with the
Mm-hmm.
idea.
Mm-hmm.
But I found myself ruminating all night about my
Mm-hmm.
parents,
Mm-hmm.
being so far away,
Mm-hmm.
not being able to activate as quickly as I needed to when things were happening. I couldn't. I was. It was on my mind to the point where,
Mhm.
and my parents were calling me constantly because they needed
Mhm.
things. And middle of the day, you get triggered. You see the phone ring. You can't leave a
Mhm.
meeting.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and SSRIs did help me regulate. It didn't fix the anxiety, but it did help me regulate how much anxiety I felt in every moment
Yep.
when my day might be interrupted with a challenging call, or a
Mhm.
doctor reached out and just needed to tell me that something was happening, or
Mhm.
those things were happening, but my shoulders didn't clench up to the extent that
Mhm.
for the rest of the day my neck was tight, or I
Mhm.
could still go home and sleep and feel like I was rested. So
Mhm.
so these things are powerful and they do work, but I
Mhm.
needed to understand that I just didn't have a bunch of chemicals running around in my body that I was going to be addicted to. And once I understood what the drug did, I
Mhm.
was like, okay, I can understand. That made sense to me in a way that felt healthy. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And people ask me that question, am I going to get addicted to it? Like, all the time. I hear that often. And I explain that there's a couple of types of addicted, right? There's physiological tolerance, which means your body builds up a tolerance to it. And so you may need more to get the same effect. And then there's psychological issues that come
yes,
along with it.
that's what I worried
And
about.
yes. And when you really talk about those psychological issues that develop into a substance use disorder, that is not how SSRIs function, right? I'd usually tell people like if it doesn't have street value, you typically aren't gonna get addicted to it, and you're gonna be hard pressed to go sell your Zoloft on the street. Now, but if you get some Xanax, you're gonna be able to sell that, or some gabapentin or whatever it is, you're gonna be able to sell
Oh,
that.
don't start coaching now. I could use a couple extra bucks. Don't-
So I'm like, that's the way to think about it. And I'm like, and your body may become accustomed to having that medication. And so when you come off, you need to come off slowly, but you're not like missing work meetings or, selling your TV to try to get this medication. Like that's just not what it is. And
No one's
so
selling TVs get Zoloft.
yeah, nobody is selling TVs for Zoloft at all.
Can I get some Zoloft? I need this. Um, well, hold on. All right, so I have to wrap you up, but I'm having fun, and I've got a couple other questions that I can't. I want to ask, would you come back and do this again? Because now I'm getting questions that I think, someone just asked. They want to talk about mental health and genetics.
Mhm.
Maybe we can talk more in the future.
Yeah.
But before we get out of here, I did have a couple questions, and you could
Hmm.
just rapid fire stuff.
Hmm.
Um, for men who aren't ready for therapy, what is one small step they can take this week to improve their mental health?
Start to write down your feelings for yourself. You can do
Got it.
that today.
Start to write down your feelings. Done.
Mhm.
Couple of vulnerable questions. What do you wish more black male patients understood about your work?
Mhm. That I am really here to help and that there's not any kind of voodoo or hoodoo behind this, and that, treating your mental health is just as important as treating your physical health.
And what do you wish your black male patients understood about themselves?
Ooh, that's an interesting question.
You say
I,
pass.
I wish that they understood that whether you express your emotions or not, you are still experiencing those emotions.
The body knows the
Whether,
score.
yes, the body keeps the score. So whether you're telling people you're sad or anxious or worried or angry or depressed, whether you're expressing it or not, is still happening. And
Yes.
so if it happens to so much that you're starting to have these physical symptoms and issues about it, then it's better out than in, right? And so I wish more Black men would be in tune with that and feel like it's not a problem if you have emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like it's actually a plus to be able to experience
To
things on a
feel
full
something.
emotional spectrum.
Okay, I got three more.
Okay,
You ready?
I'm ready.
What is something you've learned from your black male patients that has stayed with you throughout your career?
I have really learned that it is not the same for Black men and Black women. So, not to bring my solutions for what's going on with me as a Black woman to their needs as a Black man. They are different, and you have to respect that. And listen to it, and not come from a position like you know how to manage it.
Gotcha.
It's not the same.
Thank you for that. If every black man listening today could hear one message from you and truly believe it, what would that message be, Dr. Karen?
Take care of your mental health and your physical health. Go to the doctor. Make sure everything's functioning. Don't wait until you got erectile dysfunction to go to
You
the
said
doctor.
one thing. You said one
Go do it.
thing.
Now, I'm sorry, but it's all one thing. But like, if I could convince Black men of anything, it's like take care of yourself mentally and physically, because you deserve to do that. Not because you something's wrong with you, but because you deserve to have those things. You deserve to feel good, to feel respected, to feel like you can get your feelings validated. Like you deserve all of that just by being here on earth. You deserve those things. And I really hope that Black men can live in that.
All right. And the last question, what gives you hope when you think about the future of mental health in our community?
Conversations like this, right? I've been in the field for 20 plus years. We weren't always having these kind of conversations with Black men. So I think that this is really helpful. And some of the younger generations who are like, aware of mental health and they name it, I think that that's so incredibly important. And it's really starting to break down barriers that for mental health treatment that were there that our generation um, you know, wasn't able to break down. So I'm very encouraged by that.
Well, I just want to thank you. I have so many more questions, but we said an hour, so I'm going to get you out of here. But thank you, Dr. Stewart. I really appreciate it. And if if anybody wanted to just get to know Dr. Karen Stewart a little bit better, you can find her on Instagram at is it Blacktastic?
At Blacktastic 711.
At Blacktastic 7. I'm gonna have to ask you more about that. We'll talk.
There's a small story behind
Uh,
it.
and thank you for your time. This feels good. It feels helpful to me just to hear, and I think sometimes I like to have these conversations just so I can learn more about what I can do just on my level with community health, because I do believe community health is a powerful thing that we're
Mm,
just not tapping into. So this is my small attempt at that.
you're doing good, brother. And I'm happy to come back. I really enjoy myself.
Thank you so much, and talk soon.
Okay, take care.
All right, bye bye.